Hi, Angel. It's great to see you this week. How have you been doing?
I've been okay, just kind of getting through. It's getting cold here.
Yeah, it has been getting pretty cold out lately. So how has like your last week been? We haven't seen each other since about last week. Has anything been going on since then?
Um, I would say just like the typical like everyday stress of working with people, but I had some stuff happen with my client that I feel really bad about. Um, but just over the last week, I would say I've just kind of been focusing on how I'm perceiving myself, what I'm thinking about, um, just kind of trying to identify any triggers and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Now I heard you say that like something happened that you feel like pretty bad about. Would you say that like you blame yourself a lot of times when like things go wrong?
Yeah, I think even if something is just an inconvenience for someone else that has nothing to do with me,
Yeah.
I feel bad. So, like, someone could be running late for work and they ran a red light or something that has nothing to do with me, and I would feel guilty about it. I would be like, oh, like, I wish I could do something for you, like the lack of
Yeah.
fixing, I guess, the situation.
Yeah, definitely. And like people who often feel guilty over like small things, there's a really great tool out there called the responsibility pie. And this can kind of help you to figure out if you're 100% responsible for the undesirable thing that happened. People often feel like guilt or shame when they have like caused some sort of harm to others. But using the responsibility pie chart can kind of help you to figure out who's all responsible. Is it all on me, or is there other factors that could be involved? So I'm wondering if you'd be interested in doing that with me today for
Yeah,
today's
for
agenda.
sure.
Okay, perfect. And switching gears a little bit too, how did the homework go last week? So I think it was the cost and benefits of having like negative thoughts or maladaptive thoughts. How did that go?
Yeah. So I found myself using it a lot when I was having negative thoughts about myself, or if I was worried about something happening in the future, just the typical stress that kind of keeps you up at night.
Yeah.
Um, so I would use that to try to see if it was something that was taking up more of my energy and time that was actually worth it, and kind of combining a couple of the assignments together of looking at, is there actual proof or evidence or argument for it, right? So is this something that is actually a concern, or am I just kind of like making it a thing?
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so I think that was a really big part of it for sure.
That's really good to hear. And sometimes, we have these thoughts without even being aware of it. So, kind of just being able to sit down and recognize and be able to understand, is this a productive thought? Is this thought doing me more harm than good or more good than harm? Can just be really helpful in reevaluating whether that thought's accurate and whether there's evidence for it or evidence against it. So, I'm really glad you were able to use that. Would you say you had any trouble doing that for homework?
No, I wouldn't say trouble. I would say some of it was kind of, it would take longer to do than maybe some of the other exercises, just because there was a lot to it.
Yeah.
Um, but I wouldn't say it was like an issue or anything.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. I'm glad it wasn't like too hard, but still pushed you a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and shift gears and share my screen with you. Okay. So this is the responsibility pie chart, and I'm gonna show you an example first, just so it's a little bit more clear. Um, so here's kind of an example of this one guy named Vic. So Vic completed a responsibility pie chart when he felt guilty about yelling at his wife Judy after she complained to him about overdue credit card bills. This was a serious violation of his promise to Judy that he would never attack her in anger. Although he did not hit or shove Judy, he physically intimidated her by standing close to her and shouting in her face. And then Vic kind of did the responsibility pie chart and he kind of figured out who was 100% responsible within the situation and kind of relooking it over. he was able to realize it wasn't all him in this situation. So a big majority of it was his responsibility, but then there was other things that went into him yelling at his wife, such as their debts and financial problems. Judy, his wife, bringing up financial problems when they were tired, and it was late hours. And he was working tired and irritable. And so you can kind of see here how, he wasn't 100% responsible. It was debts, Judy, late hours, a bunch of different things that went into it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Um, so after kind of going over that, we'll kind of use the situation you were talking about. So could you kind of elaborate more on the negative event that happened with your client?
Yeah, so last week I took my client to court and she was basically given a week to kind of figure out her rent situation. She had to go into the hospital. She ended up getting really behind on rent because she couldn't work. And so we were given a week to kind of figure out some funding for her. And we did get a grant approved, which was great. It covered like a good 98% of it, but she still had a good, I think it was like a little over $100 left.
Okay.
And so we went into court, we talked to the judge and I tried to do everything I could to advocate for her. She was calling places and they still put in the order for basic, I forgot what it's called, but basically for her to possibly get evicted depending on how long it takes for her to get that money versus how long the court system takes. So basically she's probably going to get evicted.
Yeah.
And it's just really hard to not sit there and go, did I do everything I could? Should I have done more? Just kind of thinking about all of that stuff.
Yeah, and that's completely normal in situations like this. It seems like you care a lot for other people and your clients. And so when something kind of goes the wrong direction, it can kind of be easy to blame it on yourself and be like, what did I do wrong? I care about this person. I don't want to see them fall back behind. But a lot of times there are other factors that go into it besides like just you in the situation. Um, so kind of looking back at like the responsibility pie chart, what is like a factor that you think went into this outcome of the client possibly getting evicted besides you? What's like another factor that can go into that?
I mean, finances are a huge part of it.
Okay. And what percent, like, would you think like finances would take up for the responsibility, like out of 100%?
Um, Logically, probably a good 75, but let's just say 60.
60%. Okay. And like, tell me more about the finances. So you said like there was a grant, but it didn't like cover like all of the costs, and there was still like a little bit left over.
Right. So she didn't really have any money because after her manic episode, she obviously didn't have a lot of money left after that. And so she tried working, which the stress just kind of sent her back into another episode of that. So
Yeah.
she ended up not being able to keep working. And so it's just really frustrating to be like, okay, but she's trying, you
Yeah.
know. We called a few shelters and companies to see if they would be willing to cover that.
Yeah.
But a lot of them are either full because a lot of people need help right now, and just different stuff like that. So
Yeah. The situation sounds like very common. Like I've heard something that like 90% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. Most people can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. And then on top of that, putting mental health problems on top of that, it's even harder for a person to be able to navigate finances like that when it's already so difficult and rent is so high. So
yeah, absolutely.
that makes sense that it contributes to about like 60% of, the problem of her possibly getting evicted. And if you were to think of like any other factor that would kind of go into this, what else do you think would be a part of this?
Mm, so a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, but part of it is kind of her lack of motivation. I don't know if that's something like she's a little entitled and kind of expects everyone to just fix it for her,
Yeah.
which obviously we're not doing. Sometimes you have to learn yourself.
Yeah.
But she's struggling with realizing that we're not going to do it for her. So she's expecting us to kind of rescue her. So she's kind of letting things get really bad
Yeah.
until the
Yeah.
last minute.
And that's
So
hard too, like being the social worker in this situation, because it's like you can only do so much, you can't put in 100% of the work, you can give them all the foundation to be able to succeed, but if they're not putting in the necessary work, then it kind of can lean on them a lot. Now, what do you think the percent this would fall into in the responsibility pie chart, the client's lack of motivation?
I would say probably like a good 20%, honestly.
Okay. And is there any other factors that like you could think of that would go into this whole situation that could kind of be to blame?
She says that her landlord is really mean. Obviously, I don't know the total truth in that, but I think sometimes there is some truth in that. There is a bit of discrimination with mental health.
Yeah. And seems like he's not being very cooperative. He's just my way or no way a little bit. It's gonna turn
Right,
out if he can't make rent one time. Um,
right.
and what percent do you think that would fall into for the
Um,
chart?
Probably 10, like a
10%.
good 10%.
Okay. And is there any other thing that you can think of that would be part of the reason of her possibly getting evicted?
The judge.
The judge. Okay. Um, and what was that situation like? The judge just was kind of like, nope, we're not going to give you like more money to be able to live here. Or what was that whole situation like?
Yeah, so he really was just like, okay, well, you tried. You weren't able to get all of it covered. You know, you're gonna have to figure it out, but otherwise, like, we're gonna give them rights to evict you, essentially. So it was a little frustrating because he didn't really give her a super big opportunity to stand up for herself. It was more just like he already kind of had an idea of what he was doing.
Yeah, that is kind of hard. It seemed like even if you were like going to advocate for her, it seemed like he already knew the decision before you could even say anything to kind of change his mind about it.
I would agree. Yeah.
Now, what percent would you say the judge had in this? So I think we're at 90%.
That's 90. So I would say 10%.
10%. Okay. And now kind of like looking all over this, would you say that you're 100% responsible for the situation?
No, because based on that, I'm not really responsible in any capacity
Yeah,
for
definitely.
what happened. So,
Now, did doing this kind of have any effect on your feelings of like guilt or shame about the situation?
yeah, I think it kind of brings reality to our guilt. Like sometimes in our field, especially, there are things that we can't control.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's kind of our obligation as professionals to identify when it's not really something we could have prevented.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really glad to hear you say that. And there's not really actions you need to do to amend anything. The situation isn't really your responsibility. It kind of seems like there's a lot other more factors into it than anything that you can do in this situation. Um, and so I was kind of wondering for like homework for next week if you'd be interested and kind of looking at your thoughts from like an objective viewpoint and figuring out how often like do you blame yourself for things that happen. So and you could write it on a post-it note or you could kind of just keep track of it in your head. Like if something happens, I want you to kind of think back, who holds the most responsibility? Am I automatically blaming myself for things? So what do you think about doing that homework for next week?
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful to kind of give insight on what I'm kind of trying to carry versus what's realistic.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, definitely. And kind of after today's overall session, how do you feel in general?
I feel better. I don't feel as responsible. I mean, logically, I knew it wasn't my fault, but it's a lot easier when you have the evidence in front of you that it's not your fault.
Yeah, and it's easy to feel like that too. You know, you obviously care a lot for your client, so it's really easy to kind of feel guilty for things like that. But it's good to kind of look back at different factors that are involved other than yourself. So you automatically don't have to hold all the guilt or shame for certain situations.
Right, right. Absolutely.
Well, I'm really glad that you were able to meet with me today. Would you be able to meet the same time next week?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'll go ahead and see you then.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye.